The passport holder in Sylvie Lapointe's jacket pocket had 2 creases down the middle from where she'd folded it in a panic at the Nairobi airport 3 years ago. She'd meant to replace it since then. She never had. It was the kind of thing she kept meaning to do. Replace the fraying shoulder strap on her carry-on, buy a proper travel wallet. And then somehow never got around to, because there were always more important things. She was standing at Gate D73 in Terminal 1 at Pearson, reading the departures board when she heard his voice. "No way, Sylvie?" Her stomach dropped before her brain caught up. She turned slowly. Brock Whitfield was walking toward her with the wide, assured stride of a man who'd learned that stride at a personal development seminar. 5 years hadn't changed much about him. The jaw was the same, the gelled hair, the way he held his shoulders back like he was always about to deliver a presentation. He had a woman on his arm, wearing camel-colored everything, and a rolling suitcase that probably cost more than Sylvie's monthly car payment. "Brock," Sylvie kept her voice even. "Hey. I can't believe it." He was already doing the scan, the university hoodie, the worn Blundstones, the carry-on with the cracked wheel. She could see him cataloging it all. "What are you doing here?" "Flying somewhere," she said pleasantly. He laughed, short and sharp. "Right, obviously." "No, I mean, where are you headed? Still doing the school thing?" "I am." "Ah," he said it the way people say it when they mean still. "This is Jade Harlow." He said the name like it should mean something. "She's been doing incredible work in experiential marketing. We're headed to a conference in Vegas." The woman, who had not been introduced as anything other than a career achievement, offered Sylvie a precise smile. "Sylvie Lapointe," Sylvie said, extending her hand. "Good to meet you." "Lapointe," Brock repeated as if tasting it. "You're still going by Lapointe?" "I've always gone by Lapointe." "Right." He nodded slowly. "I just figured, you know. Anyway. How are things? Still at which school was it?" "Thornwood." "Thornwood, right, that's the one in Scarborough." "Scarborough." Another one of those pauses. "That's great, Sylvie. That's really great. You were always really passionate about that." Passionate in the tone of voice people use when they mean at least you have something. Sylvie had known Brock for 6 years and been with him for 4 of them. She knew exactly what he was doing. She'd spent 18 months after they broke up rewiring her brain to stop doing it too, measuring her own life against some invisible ledger he'd left behind. "Thanks," she said simply. "We've had a big year," Brock continued, gesturing between himself and Jade in a way that was half couple, half business partners. "I moved into the director role at Stratum in March. Jade and I just put in an offer on a place in Yorkville. 23rd floor, 2 beds, they just finished the building. And this conference this week. Big connections, big conversations, you know how it is." "That sounds exciting," Sylvie said. "It is." He seemed slightly wrong-footed by the lack of reaction. "What about you? Are you doing anything besides the teaching? Any side projects? You were always creative." "I used to tell her that," he added to Jade. "I always said, Sylvie, you have real potential. You just need to want it badly enough." There it was. The sentence she'd replayed for a year after he left. The one that had lodged itself into the part of her brain that ran quietly in the background. You just need to want it badly enough. As if the wanting was the problem. As if she'd been standing in her own way, without realizing it, and he'd been the only one generous enough to point it out. "I appreciate that," she said. "Honestly, I worry sometimes," he went on, leaning in slightly, voice dropping into something meant to sound caring. "You were always so content, which isn't a bad thing, obviously, but content can become, I don't know," he shrugged, "a ceiling." Jade had gone very still next to him, the way people go still when they can feel a situation tilting but aren't sure which way. "You're still flying economy, yeah?" Brock glanced at her boarding pass before she tucked it away. "We got upgraded to business. Stratum covers it for director level now." He said it the way people say things they've been saving up. It makes such a difference, honestly. Once you fly business, you can't really go back. You'd know that if you... He stopped himself. Anyway. The old version of Sylvie, the one who'd spent 4 years quietly shrinking so he'd stopped telling her she was too small, would have apologized. For the hoodie. For the gate. For whatever about her presence made the air between them feel like a comparison she was losing. She didn't apologize. "I'm actually really well, Brock, but I should probably..." "No, hold on." He touched her elbow. The gesture was light but deliberate. "I'm not trying to be a jerk. I'm just saying, you had so much going for you, and I used to think if you'd just pushed yourself, applied for that arts admin role or done something real with the photography or..." "Brock. I'm just being honest. Isn't that what you always wanted from me? Honesty?" The terminal had gotten quieter around them, in the way public spaces do when something is happening that isn't quite a scene but is close to one. A man 2 rows over had stopped pretending to look at his laptop. A woman with a toddler on her lap was watching with the focused expression of someone who has witnessed this kind of thing before and knows exactly what it is. Sylvie looked at Brock, really looked at him the way she'd stopped doing somewhere around year 3, and thought, "You haven't changed at all." She wasn't sure if that was sad or just true. Maybe both. If you've ever had someone spend years convincing you that you peaked at the wrong moment, you know how this part of the story feels. And if you haven't, keep watching. Because what happened next was the part Brock Whitfield would spend a long time trying to forget. And if you're not subscribed yet, hit that button now. Because this is about to go somewhere he absolutely did not see coming. In the Air Canada signature suite on the departures level, Ronan Keefe had been on the phone for 40 minutes longer than he'd planned to be. The call was with the board of a climate technology firm he'd quietly funded 2 years ago. Not because anyone had asked him to, and not because it would generate press, but because the founder, a 26-year-old from Sudbury, was doing something genuinely interesting with soil carbon sequestration. The call kept running long because it kept being interesting. He checked his watch. Sylvie had texted 20 minutes ago. At the gate they moved it again, D73 now. He'd sent back a thumbs up, he should have followed up. He wrapped the call, tucked his phone into the inside pocket of his jacket, an ordinary navy jacket, the kind sold at any decent mid-range outfitter, and picked up his carry-on. Inside it, among other things, was the novel Sylvie had recommended 2 weeks ago, and a packet of those cherry throat lozenges she'd slipped in without mentioning it, because she'd noticed him clearing his throat on calls. He took the escalator down. "The thing is," Brock was saying, "I'm not saying you failed. I'm saying there's a version of you that never happened. And that's, I don't know, Sylvie, I actually think about that sometimes. What you could have become if someone had really pushed you." "Someone did," Sylvie said quietly. "What?" "Someone pushed me, it just wasn't you." Brock's expression did something complicated, a flicker of something that wasn't quite hurt and wasn't quite anger. He opened his mouth. "Mr. Keefe." The gate agent, young, professionally composed, slightly out of breath, had appeared at Sylvie's peripheral vision, tablet in hand. "I'm so sorry to interrupt. Your updated seat confirmation is in the system, and ground services has flagged they're ready to begin priority boarding whenever you'd like. We can start anytime, no rush at all on our end." Brock's mouth was still open. The gate agent was speaking to a point just behind Sylvie's left shoulder. Sylvie didn't turn around immediately. She watched Brock's face do the calculation, the who, the what, the slow, terrible mathematics of it, and she felt, for the first time in the entire conversation, something loosen in her chest. Then she felt the warmth of a hand at the small of her back. "Hey," Ronan's voice, low and unhurried the way it always was. "Sorry, ran long." "It's fine." She leaned into him slightly. "I was just catching up with someone." Ronan stepped to her side. He looked at Brock the way Sylvie had noticed he looked at most things. Without performance, without hurry, just actually looking. He was not an imposing man in any obvious sense. Medium height, 41, with a face that was more kind than handsome, and a jacket that cost no more than $150 on a good day. There was nothing on the surface of him that should have made Brock's face go the color it went. But Brock had apparently made the connection. "You're," Brock said, started again, "you're Ronan Keefe." "I am." Ronan extended his hand with the ease of someone who'd had this moment many times and decided long ago to be straightforward about it. "Brock?" "Yeah." Brock shook it. His palm, Ronan noticed, was damp. "Brock Whitfield. Sylvie and I used to know each other." "So she mentioned." Ronan glanced briefly at Jade, who had rearranged her face into something carefully neutral. "Nice to meet you both." "I didn't," Brock looked from Ronan to Sylvie and back. "I didn't realize you two were." 4 years in October," Sylvie said. She said it the same way she'd said everything else in the last 10 minutes. Just a fact, just the truth, sitting there plainly. Jade made a small sound, barely audible, the sound of someone doing arithmetic very fast and not liking the answer. "I want to say thank you," Ronan said, and his voice was perfectly, immovably pleasant, "for keeping Sylvie company while I was tied up. I hope she wasn't any trouble." The sentence landed the way sentences like that tend to, softly, and then all at once. Sylvie reached into the front pocket of her carry-on and pulled out the document folder she'd been carrying since Ottawa. A cream-colored envelope with the UNESCO Education Commission letterhead visible at the fold. She'd meant to review her notes on the flight. She tucked it into the seat pocket of the nearest chair without making a thing of it. But the letterhead was there if you were paying attention. The words keynote address were visible, sitting quietly, doing their work. Brock was paying attention. "We should board," Sylvie said to Ronan. "Whenever you're ready." His hand stayed at the small of her back. Quiet, habitual, The gesture of a man who had been doing it for 4 years and would keep doing it without thinking. Sylvie looked at Brock one last time. She'd imagined, in some corner of herself she rarely visited, that a moment like this might feel triumphant. It didn't, exactly. It felt more like setting something down that she'd been carrying so long she'd stopped noticing the weight. "It was good to run into you," she said. "Sylvie." His voice had lost its earlier texture. I didn't know. If I'd known you were going to." "You knew who I was," she said. And because she didn't want it to land as cruelty, she let a breath go and added, "Take care of yourself, Brock. I mean that." They turned toward the gate. Behind them, in a voice clearly not meant to carry but carrying anyway, Jade said, "Do you know who that is? That's Ronan Keefe. His exit from Meridian was in the Globe, Brock." The Globe and Mail. How well did you know her? Whatever Brock said, if he said anything, didn't reach them. The jetway was empty except for a ground crew member who nodded once and stepped back. The fluorescent noise of the terminal dropped away. Sylvie exhaled a long, slow release all the way down. "How much did you hear?" she asked. Ronan was quiet for a moment. "Enough." His jaw tightened in the small way it did when he was making a decision about how much to say. "I was on the escalator. I handled it." "You did." He looked at her sideways. "You were extraordinary. You almost came over early." "I almost came over early," he confirmed. "What stopped you?" "Your face," he said it matter-of-factly. "You didn't need me to." That was the thing about Ronan that Sylvie still hadn't gotten used to. 4 years in. He was always actually paying attention. Not the performed kind. Not the kind that announced itself. Just real attention, the kind that could tell the difference between she needs help and she's got this. Stay back. Brock had spent 4 years telling her she needed someone to push her. What he'd meant was, someone to narrate who she should be. Ronan had never once told her who she should be. He'd found her at a gallery opening, standing in front of a half-finished Lauren Harris print, genuinely puzzling over it, and his first question had been, "What's your read on the horizon line?" Not "Where do you work?" Not "What do you do?" "What's your read on the horizon line?" She'd talked to him for 2 hours. She'd known, somewhere near the end of that first conversation, that here was someone who actually wanted to know what she thought about things. Not the version of her that performed well at dinner parties. The one that stood in front of paintings and puzzled. "He said I didn't have vision," Sylvie said as they stepped aboard. This from a man who spent 10 minutes not recognizing his own ex-girlfriend's husband. Ronan raised his eyebrows mildly. "His opinion on vision is noted." Sylvie smiled. It started small and then wasn't. "I'm serious," she said. "He spent 4 years telling me I was too comfortable with ordinary, that I had a ceiling. And in those same 4 years, you built the curriculum initiative now running across 47 schools in 3 provinces." He settled into the window seat, leaving the aisle for her the way he always did, because he knew she liked being able to get up. "That doesn't sound like a ceiling to me. That sounds like someone who knew exactly what she was doing the whole time." "I wasn't doing it when I was with him." "No, you were figuring out what you actually wanted." He looked out the small oval window at the gray Pearson afternoon. The dicing trucks crawling the tarmac, the flat January sky. "That takes time. It's not the same as wasted time." Sylvie put her bag in the overhead bin and sat down. She looked out the window too, at all that ordinary and ongoing gray, and found she didn't want to look away from it. It was hers. The whole unremarkable Scarborough-accented sprawl of it. "He's going to look us up when he lands," she said. "Probably. He's going to feel very bad." "Probably. Is it wrong that I don't feel bad about that?" Ronan considered this with the seriousness he gave things that deserved seriousness. "I think you've earned the right to feel whatever you feel about it. And I think you're too decent to enjoy it for long." He picked up the novel she'd pressed into his hands 2 weeks ago and held it up. "I started this on the way to the lounge. First chapter is very good." "I know, I told you it was very good." "You were right." He opened to his bookmark, as usual. The cabin door sealed. The hum of the aircraft settled into something steady beneath them. Sylvie leaned her head back and felt the last of the afternoon's tension go out of her like heat. She thought about Brock sitting at D73 with his Yorkville condo and his director title and his 4-hour delay. She'd caught the departures board on the way through, seen the orange delayed blinking next to his Las Vegas flight, weather cited, no revised time yet. She thought about how he'd get home and open his laptop and find her name in the UNESCO coverage. And then find Ronan's name and trace the lines backward. She thought about the brand partnership proposal that Brock's firm, Stratum Creative, had sent to Ronan's company, Meridian, 4 years ago. A pitch that had gone nowhere, screened at the preliminary stage, never advanced, quietly shelved. She'd found a Stratum newsletter in an old email folder last month while doing a cleanup, Brock's name on the masthead as director. And she'd made the connection then for the first time. She'd never mentioned it to Ronan. She'd sat with it for a moment and then closed the folder. Some things only made sense in reverse. Back at the gate, the departures board ticked over, delayed, 1440-1855. Brock sat in a plastic chair that was slightly too small and held his coffee from the Tim Hortons by security and let it go cold. Jade had gone to find a charging port 20 minutes ago and not come back. His phone kept buzzing. A LinkedIn notification, someone had tagged him in a post. He opened it. A clip, 22 seconds, shot on someone's phone from a few rows back. The quality was bad, the audio was clear enough. The caption, when you spend 10 minutes explaining to someone that they lack vision and it turns out their husband is Ronan Keefe. Airport karma doesn't miss. 53 shares, it had been posted 40 minutes ago. His colleague Fen had texted, "Dude, are you trending right now?" His manager Elaine had texted, "Saw something circulating online. Nothing urgent, let's touch base when you're back in town." Nothing urgent from a manager was never nothing urgent. His mother had texted, "Brock Anthony Whitfield, what on earth is your cousin sending me right now?" He put the phone face down on his knee. Sylvie Lapointe. Sylvie, who had never once raised her voice at him in 4 years. Who had made him dinner when he was stressed and listened to his work anxieties with what he'd taken at the time for passive contentment, and now, with the particular horror of hindsight, understood had been patience. Sylvie, who had been building something the entire time, and simply hadn't required his commentary on it. He thought about the keynote letterhead. He thought about Meridian and the 45-minute brand pitch Stratham's team had sent them in 2022. The one that had died without even a rejection note. Just silence, which was its own kind of answer. He thought about the copy of Find Your Drive he'd given Sylvie for her birthday the last year they were together. And how she'd thanked him with what he'd mistaken for polite tolerance and set it on the shelf. And how he'd taken that as proof she wasn't willing to try. He thought about her face when she'd said it. "You knew who I was." Not the husband, not the UNESCO envelope, not the ground crew stepping back with their particular kind of trained deference. That sentence, the one she'd said quietest, which had somehow landed deepest. "You knew who I was, you just never bothered to look." He had known. He'd known her for 6 years. He'd just decided at some point that what he knew wasn't enough, and then he'd spent 4 years trying to edit her into someone he thought he deserved. Jade came back eventually. She sat down 2 seats away instead of beside him, opened her laptop, and didn't say anything. Brock didn't say anything either. The departures board updated again, delayed, 1855-1940. Outside the terminal windows, the Pearson tarmac stretched gray and wide and indifferent, and somewhere far above it, past the low January cloud, a plane had already climbed through. The clouds broke somewhere over Quebec, and the light came through the window in that particular afternoon way that makes the inside of an aircraft feel briefly warm and suspended above everything. Ronan had fallen asleep, or close to it, the novel splayed open on his chest, his breathing slow. Sylvie watched him for a moment. The slack peacefulness of someone who had learned, quite deliberately, how to actually rest. He'd told her once that he'd been bad at it before. Before the acquisition, before the money, before all the noise that arrived with both. He'd had to teach himself. He treated it like any other skill, worth developing, worth protecting. She got her notebook out, an ordinary spiral-bound thing, the kind sold in packs at any Staples, and uncapped her pen. The curriculum revision for the Timmins pilot needed attention. 2 sections of the keynote were still bothering her. There was a message from the Halifax project coordinator. She'd been meaning to answer for 3 days. She started writing, the sun shifted. The aircraft hummed its low, constant hum. At some point Ronan's hand found hers on the armrest without him waking up. His thumb moved once across her knuckles. A reflex, a habit. Something the body did without asking the mind for permission. She felt it and kept writing. "You always told me I needed to want more." That was what she'd said at the gate. "The thing is, I always knew exactly what I wanted." She had. Even when she hadn't known how to say it, even in the years when she'd let someone else's measuring tape stand in for her own, some part of her had always known. A classroom that felt safe, work that reached past the edges of her own life. Someone who looked at her like she was already whole. These were not small things. They had never been small things. She'd just made the mistake for a while, of letting someone calibrate the wrong instruments and then accepting the reading. She didn't do that anymore. The notebook filled. Outside the oval window, the Gulf of St. Lawrence appeared below. Gray-green, enormous, entirely unconcerned with the small dramas of the airport terminals it had been flying above since before she was born. Sylvie capped her pen. Ronan, without opening his eyes, said, "Good session?" "Good session." "Halifax?" "Almost." He smiled without moving. the expression settling into the lines of his face like it had always been there, which she supposed it had. You'll get there. I know. They flew north and east into the last of the afternoon light, and below them the country went on being itself, vast, unhurried, full of ordinary people doing quietly extraordinary things that no one would ever make a video about, which was fine because they weren't doing them for that. And somewhere behind them, in a gate that smelled of airport coffee and recycled air, a departures board kept blinking. Delayed, and Brock Whitfield sat with his phone faced on his knee and the specific weight of a lesson arriving 20 years too late to be useful. The irony settling in like cold with nowhere left to go.